Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Metzia Daf Peches, and we are starting about 2/3 of the way down on Pei Zayin Amud Beis. We've been discussing a technical Gemara based on the Mishnah, which was on the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, and not to the top of Pei Zayin Amud Beis, about when a worker is allowed to eat the food that he is harvesting on behalf of his bailen. So we had given a couple of answers of what the Mari Mekomos were as to where a poel is allowed to eat food that is mechubar, that is currently attached to the ground. He's going to harvest that food. We had said that as long as it doesn't get to the point of miruach hakri, where it's brought into the house, where it's then chayiv in maisros, he's allowed to eat from that food. We tried a couple of Mari Mekomos, and now we're up to the fact that possibly from the pasuk of V'chermesh, that's a sickle. Anything that's cut by a sickle, that can then be included of what the poel is allowed to eat. So it says the Gemara, Teinach debar chermesh. I understand. If you're talking about wheat, you're talking about things that are cut by a sickle. What about an apple? You don't cut an apple with a sickle. You pluck it with your bare hands. So we might have a din from the Mishnah. We can understand from chermesh that anything that's cut with a sickle, the poel can eat, no problem. But what about things that are not? They're not shaykh to a sickle. Not everything is plucked, is cut that way. Some things are plucked. Amar Rav Yitzchak, you're 100% right. Amar Kra Kama. We spoke about this yesterday. The pasuk that speaks about grains that grow. L'rabos kol ba'alei kama, which teaches us to include anything that grows tall. Says the Gemara, how can that be? The Amris yesterday, there was a chiddush in Kama. What was unique about Kama? The Amris Kama d'mechayva b'chala. We learned yesterday, based on Gzera Shava yesterday, that anything that's Kama related is related to the mitzvah and the chiyuv of chala. Apples are not shaykh by the world of challah. So maybe you can only eat things if you're a poel that's shaykh to challah. What about apples? What about oranges? What about blueberries and strawberries, which are plucked by hand, which are not chayiv and not chayiv in challah? So it says the Gemara, you're right. That was true yesterday. V'hani mili mikame denesi chermesh. That was before we knew about the drasha of the word chermesh, of sickle. So now we're going to do a combo deal. We're going to do chermesh plus kama will give us the proper answer to our question. Hashta de asi chermesh. Now that we know that we have the pasuk of chermesh, which teaches us that anything that is cuttable, is harvested by a sickle, should be included. Israbile kol davar chermesh. Ve'afal gav de lo mechayev b'chala. Even though it's not going to be something that's chayiv and chala, namely anything that's harvested, the poel can eat from. Otherwise, you could imagine the supply and demand. I don't want to work for your strawberry patch. I don't get to eat the food. I'd rather work in the grain fields. I at least get to bring some food home. Sickle. So the Gemara is saying, no, anything that's going to be harvested by a poel, he can eat. Says the Gemara, okay, if chermesh is the way to go, then kama lamali. Says the Gemara, l'rabos kol ba'alei kama, to teach us that everything is included. Everything. So that therefore we come up with our, I don't know if Chazal were concerned about the supply and demand issue. They're making drushes from psukim. So the psukim are telling us how we measure what the poel can eat. The poel can eat anything that was mechubar, that's been harvested. No difference between chayiv and chala and not. No difference between cut with a sickle or plucked by hand. A very, very broad heter that the Mishnah teaches us. And v'hashta denafkalan michermesh ve'umikama. Now that we learn out this din from our Mishnah, that a poel can eat food that was mechubar and now is cut down. So what do we need the rest of the pasuk for that we spoke about yesterday? Kisavo bekerem re'echa lamali. Why do we need that pasuk? Amar Rava, we need that, but for other reasons. That's the hilchosab, just to teach us some side halachos. Kidatanya, the Brisa writes, we're 10 lines from the bottom, 4 lines before the wide lines. The pasuk says kisavo, and it says nemar kan bia. We have a language of bia, of entrance over here. V'neman lohalan lo savo lav hashemesh, which is talking about a din, an obligation, a mitzvah d'oraisa that we have. It's actually an isser, not a mitzvah d'oraisa, to pay our employees online. Lo salin, you're not allowed to not pay your employees. It's a negative. It's a lot. So it says the Gemara, we have a comparison between these two. Malahalan bepoel akas mitaber. Just like when it says lo savo, the language of bia, that's talking about me paying my employees, that I have to pay them by the end of the workday. Of course, that's a worker that's hired for a day. I have team members who are paid by the week, by the month, as long as there's a seder hadvarim, there's an agreed upon payment scale. But when you're hiring someone for a job today, they have to be paid today. It's a din d'oraisa. Babysitters, you have someone working in your house, they've already spent money. That's even more complex because that's halva, that's getting into ezu neshech, that's getting into more complex sugyas. But let's assume a person's hired for their skill, right? A person does a task, they're hired for a skill. Please fix my electrical out. You don't have to buy anything. They fix my electrical out. I'm like, I'll pay you next week. Usser, completely usser. So it says the Gemara, the Gzera Shava is between the pasuk of Kerem, of Kisavo bekerem, and the pasuk of Lo Savo Allah of Shemesh. Malahalim b'akas medaber. Afkan over here, by our case, b'poel akas medaber, we're talking about the worker being able to eat. What does Bekerem Re'ach mean? The lo Bekerem Kusi, these halachos are different by a goy. Of course, we know throughout Shas, a Kusi has different definitions. Sometimes it's a reference to a goy, sometimes it's a reference to Yidden who had converted. We've discussed this numerous times throughout Shas, throughout the last many 1600 blot, whatever it is. So therefore, the Gemara says v'lo Bekerem Kusi. Now, there's a problem with this. Hanicha lamanda amar gezel kusi aser. If you tell me gezel kusi is aser, but then I have a pasuk that's a matir, say there, I understand why I have the pasuk. But hainu de itzrich kra lemeshrei pol. That's why I understand that for the pol, he's allowed to take the food of the kusi if he's working in that environment. However, says the Gemara, gezel kusi mutter, then why do I need a pasuk? If it's mutter to take the paris of a goy when you're an employee without a pasuk, I don't need the pasuk. Hashtag zela mutter. Now that I'm allowed to take from him without rishus poel mibaya. That's ridiculous. So what then would the psukim mean according to the shita that gezel kusi is mutter? Just ladina, we paskin that gezel akum is an isser derabbanan. You're not allowed to take things from a guy. That's an isser derabbanan of theft. And these things do come up. There are some that fancy heterim in the poskim by paying back the government. Like if you, again, be careful in the recordings, but if there is a, I don't know who's like, are you ready? Stop talking, lawyer boy. I don't want to hear your commentary today. But there is this scenario in halacha that because we have a halva to the goyim of the government, so the way our taxes work, we pay in arrears. So I'm going to pay on April 15th of 2024. I'm going to pay for my 2023 years. So hafkas halva by a goy is mutter. If there's a halva that we have by a goy and I don't want to or need to pay it, and there's a way to get out of it without it being noticeable, it's mutter. Hafkas halva by a goy is mutter. So you got to be very careful. It's not a good practice. And certainly if everything is paper trails, you would be crazy to do that because of audits. Venmo just started this. Venmo now sends out, if you have transactions over $600, they're sending paperwork to the government. They're sending, let's say as a moel, I get paid in cash. It's hafkas halva. So technically speaking, you're allowed, technically speaking, to, according to some poskim, you're allowed to not pay those, you don't pay taxes on those items. But here, that's not because gezel's mutter by a goy. We pass in the gezel's and the darabanan by a goy. But of course, halva is mutter by a yid. That's mamish aser, and you can't do that. Oh, thanks for lending me money, Ari. I'm just not paying you back. That's not allowed by a goy. It's technically mutter. With Ari? Oh, I don't know what's happening right now.
I think it might not be.
Okay. Says Gemara, second of the wide lines. So how then would the shita who holds that gezer kusi is mutter? What's the point of the psukim? Mokim la bekerem re'acha v'lo shel hektish. But by a hektish, you don't get, if you're the worker for hektish fields, there you don't get to eat the food. That's not allowed. And as well, the achalta, fascinating, v'lo motzetz. If let's say you're eating grapes, you're not allowed to consume the grape by sucking out the juices. Why not? Because each grape, you're only eating a small percentage of the grape. You have to eat so much to be satiated. You're burning the person's product. It's not fair. Eat regular. Eat like a mensch. Eat your grapes. Fascinating machlokes in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Yud about eating one single grape. It's machlokes if it's so chashuv that you have to make a bracha achrona on one grape, even if it's less than the shiur that's typically stated for a kazayis, whatever it is. So the poskim say you should be careful. Either cut your grapes in half and eat them half at a time, because that you're not eating the whole grape, or eat a definite shiur, 3, 4, 5 grapes. It depends on how large the grapes are. You know, the kazayis book, you can go look in there and see the pictures. If you eat regular grapes, probably 4, 5, 6 grapes, whatever it is, then you make a proper. And if you eat just one, you've entered yourself to machlokas rishonim. We should try to avoid that with grapes in general. Okay, so no motzetz, you're not allowed to do that. And anavim, what does that teach us? The word anavim, below anavim the davar acher. You can eat the grapes, but you can't eat the grapes and other things. The rishonim here explain that the reason why is because it might create a little bit more appetite. We have this by the karpas, by the seder, that it says, that's what some of the Rishonim write, that by karpas, it begins to make us hungry. It's a little bit in the stomach, it begins to make us hungry. So if we have anavim plus davar acher, that may make us hungry, then I'll eat more of the owner's food. That's not right either, just the anavim. Don't take more food. Kenafshecha, what does that mean? Kenafshecha on the pasuk means, 4 lines from the bottom, kenef shel balabais. You, the poel, are like the balabais. Kach nafsho shel poel. Ma nafshecha, if you are the owner, ochel upater, you're allowed to eat at that phase before it's brought into your house. No problem, you can eat. It's arai. It's prior to bringing into the bais. We'll discuss this on the next Talmud. Af nafsho shel poel ochel upater, same exact. And what's sovachamin? That you're full. V'lo achila gasa. You're not allowed to pound. You eat until you're full. You eat until you're full, and then you stop. When your stomach says, I'm a little bit full, you stop eating, not like Americans. And we feel like we're full. We're like, bring me another dish. That's usher here. that would probably be geneva. You eat according to whatever when your stomach says you're full, then you're done eating. That's considered to be normal. And all of these dinim are learned out from the pasuk based on this. It's a brisa, but it's based on the shita who holds that gezel kusi is mutter, because if gezel kusi is usser, we need the pasuk to be matir by gezel kusi. If you hold it's mutter, the pasukim need other explanations, and therefore we have all these explanations. Last. So the one who doesn't hold that it's mutter, that's a great question. The Gemara does not go into that. That's you would expect that in the Shak Levatariya. Okay, according to the one who holds gezel kusi usser, and we need these psukim to teach us that it's mutter for the polity. How do we learn these things out? The Gemara doesn't go into that. It's a great question, and I don't know the answer. And then the Gemara says, lastly, for the pasuk, you're holding a container, a basket. Let's say Tomer's younger, gives me a basket. I'm harvesting. I'm putting them in my basket. No problem. But once I finish that basket, once I'm done collecting, then I can't eat anymore. Then I'm done. That's the rest of the drasha. When you're done putting them in the basket, now you can't just walk through and pluck. By the way, you ever see people go through? I've seen this where they go through jewel. They take a grape and they eat it. It's geneva derabbanan. If it was a yid, it would be geneva deraisa, because they're sold by weight. You cannot take a grape. That's not right. What if Masha ain't came? When what? If they're matir, I'm just saying pasha. If they're matir, that's for sure true. But I do this all the time in jewel. I buy a box of the Entenmann small cookies. I open it. I make them mazonos. That's not geneva.
You're saying in the store?
Yeah, pasha. Yeah. I'm embarrassed, but I'm going to say it anyways. It's true. And then I get there and she's like, I'm sorry, do you know that this container's open? I'm like, do you know that it's half empty? Thank you very much. Yes. Crumbs in my beard, my sphera beard, amazing. All right. Next, bottom line of Pei Zayin Amud Beis, getting to today's daf. Amar Rav Yanai, Ein hatevel mischai b'maiser. When does untithed food become chayiv in maiser? When does this take place? Says the Gemara. Turning to the top of Peches Menalef, a short amud and a beautiful amud. This is a very important Shas Machlokas. Meiser comes up everywhere. We've seen it dozens of times in Shas. Big Machlokas. When does the chiyuv of Meiser kick in for a food? This is a Machlokas Amoraim. Ad shiur pnei abayis, says the Gemara, has to be brought into your house, or should see the face of your house. Shenemar bi'arti kodesh min abayis. Rav Yochanan Amar afilu chatzer kovas. Tanakama was of the opinion. Rav Yanai says it's in the house. Rav Yochanan says even in the chatzer. Machlokas achron. When do we say that you're chayiv and meiser? And each one has a pasuk. The first shita, Rabbi Yanai said, "Achir pnei abayis." That's biarti hakodesh min abayis. Once it's in, let's say this was my house. Now that it sees the walls of my house, you're chayiv and meiser. However, Rabbi Yochanan says it's when it's outside in the field, no problem at all. Back in the day, often their fields were in front of their houses, and the houses were at the back. There are some houses like that. Our houses typically in our neighborhood are reversed, where we have our fields in the front and the chutzner are in the back. So that would be a practical case scenario. Then the Gemara says. Let me just finish. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afil Chatzer Kabas. What's his pasuk? Shneimar va'achalu bish arecha. That's your field. That's exactly what's done. Rabbi Yochanan Nami Yaksib min Abayis. What do you do with the pasuk of Rabbi Yanai? Rabbi Yanai says that you're chayav on meiser once the food is brought into your house. What do you do with the pasuk? You said it was the field. So it says the Gemara Amar Lach Chatzer Dumya de Bayis. No, it's a Chatzer that has the same features of the bayis, such that what ma bayis hamishtamer, just like a house. Inside the four walls of your house is more protected. It needs to be a field that's protected. Let's say the jugma, you don't have a fence around your field. My front grass doesn't have a fence around it. That's not mishtamer. Anyone can come take anything whenever they want. So that doesn't work. The Rav Yanai, what do you do with Rav Yochanan's pasuk? Rav Yanai nami haksiv bish arecha. No, derech sha'ar. Fascinating din that it has to be derech sha'ar. It has to be that the food is brought in through the regular field in the beginning of your house. La'afuke derech gagos v'karfifos delo. If you bring the meiser into your house through a window, through an attic, through a roof, you're not chayav in meiser. It's a loophole. You have to bring it in bish arecha like a normal way. Such as the machlokes achronim, a machlokes amoraim, I should say, excuse me, between Rav Yanai and Rav Yochanan when the moment of meiser kicks in. Masi Rav Chanina Chazah. A big workaround. Yeah. It's a big loophole. It's true. It's accurate, but it's a loophole. Yeah, it's like tax loopholes, like the ones I just said earlier. Yeah, that's a halachic loophole. That's actually not a tax loophole.
People do that now. People do that now.
It's not shaykh for us because we don't pay meiser. Yeah, they would throw the corn through the window like one ear at a time. And then you're not. It's mutter. It's just not from. It's novel b'rshus haTorah. Wow. We knocked down the table for you, so we start out fine.
Good.
Smile at everyone. The chassan's here. Mazel
Hey.
tov. Mazel tov. We understand how this relationship works perfectly. Thank you very much.
Hey.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov. Okay, beautiful. So the Gemara says, Masiv Rav Chan. Oh, you were talking to me. Loopholes. Absolutely right. What did you say? True story. It felt like a leash almost. It was very, that was awesome. Masiv Rav Chanina Chozak Kenafshecha. We had said earlier, I should say in the previous we said Kach Nafsho Shel Poel, that the rules of the Bailim and the rules of the Poel are the same. Ma Nafshecha Ochel Upater, just like the owner is allowed to eat a few things arai right after it's cut, and that's okay. Af Nafsho Shel Poel Ochel Upater, says the Gemara. There's an implication from here that's talking about a Poel. What is implied from here is that Halokeach Chayiv. Is that if you're buying something, you don't have the heter of the Poel. The Poel, that was our whole previous amud. The Poel is allowed to eat the food after it's cut, but before it has a chiyuv meiser. It seems to be, as a diuk, that if you're a buyer, you don't have that leniency. You can't nibble on the food in the field. You're not allowed to do that. Even if the Bailim allow you, it's the Torah that says you're not allowed to do that, or at least it's an implication. My la b'sadeh. Where does the lokeach buy the food from? He's out in the field. He buys it out in the field. So maybe we should say that this is like the shita of Rav Yochanan, that chatzer is the right answer. Amar Papa, no. This is a crazy ukimta. Halfway down. Amar Papa, hacha b'te'ena, it's a fig tree. Ha'omedes begina, it's standing in a field. The nofa, the branches, nota lechatzer askinan. And the branches go over into the chatzer, according to the shita of Rav Yochanan. Or, ulamant amar labayis. The branch goes into the house. So perhaps, says the Gemara, that this fig tree has long branches. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's over in the chatzer, and therefore it's the time of meiser already. That's why the lokeach can't eat it. And according to Rabbi Yana, it's in the window of your house. Could you imagine having a tree hanging into your house? You just plug dates whenever you want. A beautiful, very au natural. I would never want that. Cicadas, it's cicada season. I don't think anybody wants that. But says the Gemara, no, the Okimta would work even according to all the Shitas, because perhaps it's a tree that has the unique branches, and therefore you cannot make a diuk about the lokeach. Yachi, if that's true, that you have a tree that's going into your house, balabais nami nechayv. How can the balabais eat anything? Hare, the branch is in his house. He's already chayiv meiser the second he plucks it. There is no time between mechubar and chayiv meiser. He's plucking in a makom chiyuv meiser. He should never be able to eat it. Says the Gemara, you're 100% right, but there's a difference between the bailim and the lokeach. Balabais einav b'te'enasa. What's his mindset? It's on the tree. It's only on the actual dates that he's buying. And since the mindset of the bailim is the whole tree, even though it's in your house, I don't know how this works, you're not yachayv. Masha'en kain the lokeach, he is completely usher from eating this. So says the Gemara. And says the Gemara, v'lokeach mi deraisa mi mechayv. We just made a diuk from the brisa that perhaps the lokeach has a chiyuv deoraisa, or I should say an isser deoraisa, benefiting from the food at that time. Tanya, how can you say that? There was a case scenario in history where people weren't doing such good things. Not for the first time. 3 lines down from the bottom, Peches Meral, says the Gemara, Mimnema Charvo, Chanuyo Shel Bayis, Shel Beis Hino. So Beis Hino was a place. Their stores were destroyed. Shalosh Shanim Kodem Yerushalayim, before the destruction of Yerushalayim. They did something wrong. What did they do? What they did is they tried to understand the pasuk in a unique way, and they then violated halacha because of it. What they were saying, turning to the top of Peches Mebeis, was aser ta'aser, and the next pasuk continues ve'achalta below mocher, that these rules don't apply to a seller, which was inaccurate. They made up their own drush. It wasn't true. Tvu azaracha below lokeach, that by the lokeach also the halachos were not that way. These were all incorrect. Really, the lokeach had an isser. They tried to say the lokeach didn't have an isser. So what do at least we see from that? It's not a clear din doraisa, because they teach the psukim in a way where they said the lokeach doesn't have a din doraisa like this. So then that's very strange. That means that it wasn't a pashat azach, that a lokeach has a chiyuv doraisa to not eat that food. So that's what the Gemara says. You're right. Ella, when we talk about a lokeach and say he's not allowed to eat the food that was mechubar and he plucked it out, he's buying it out in the field, that's only a din derabanan, midrabanan bekras mach tabal. They were called out by the onesh minach shamayim. No, meaning they got an onesh. So I didn't look into the deeper aspects of it, but the Gemara makes it clear that they were penalized. Yeah, right. That's what, if you look at Rashi on the bottom of Peches Med Aleph, it's just a little bit of depth. Klomar, Masha Aser Medivrei Chachamim, Matzu lo heter min Torah. They were finagling. They were finagling. It's like there's a book called One People, Two Worlds. It's written by Lakewood Rav and a very erudite Reform rabbi. Fascinating. But what you see is that there's a manipulation of the text. We're true to form. Like if the text doesn't work, we're done. If whatever the Torah says, we do. But they're twisting and turning and curving and manipulating, and it's so that I'm not saying they were Reform Jews. I'm just saying they were manipulating the halacha. They were not doing it the right way. Says the Gemara, if that's true, then what does the pasuk lechanafsha mean? So the Gemara jumps into a connected topic. Peches mid base 3 lines down. L'chidatanya kenafshecha. Ma nafshecha, if you were the bailim imcha samta pater, if you muzzled yourself, namely if you wouldn't eat the food, then you don't need to give meiser. You're not eating the food. Who cares? Af pol imcha samta pater pasha, that the pol also would not have to give meiser. So then the Gemara says, wait 1 second. Masev rat mar zutra. Ezehu garnan lemaisros. What is considered the goren, the granary? Namely, what's considered the gamar malacha? How do we know when we're done and therefore you're chayav meiser? What is the goren lemaisros? Bikishum of doing. We're talking about gourds and these types of things, pumpkins, whatever. Mishe yifkesu. Difficult word to read. I wanted to read sheyif seku because that's what we're not used to seeing. This is mishe yifkesu. What does that mean? Rabbi Asi, mishe yinotel pikes shalahen. The pikes was the little bud flower. Right when there's a deviation from the branch, there's a little bud there that has a flower, and then whatever is going to grow is going to grow. When the flower begins to fall off, so that's the moment of Gemar Malachton. Says the Gemara, "My love, mishe yifkesu ba'afilu b'sadeh." Isn't this true? Afilu b'sadeh. Rav Yochanan's right. Rav Yana is wrong. Says the Gemara, "No, lo mishe yifkesu bebayis." Even if it happens in your house, says the Gemara, "Yihachi, why did you say mishe yifkesu? It should be ad yifkesu." A little bit of a slight language. I don't think we would easily appreciate the difference between these two lashonos. But ad means up until, meaning there's more time. Mishe yifkesu means seemingly right at the beginning. When it happens, we'll see that's going to be what the Gemara says. So the Gemara responds, Itana achi yifkesu havamina ad Gemara lepikusayu. I might have thought until all the petals of the flowers fall off, that's when Gemar Malacha is. Kamash malan, that's not correct. Mishe yifkesu michi aschule pikusayu. Only from the beginning of the flowerings, I should say, even from the beginnings, that's when Gemar Malacha then applies for dulum ukishum for these types of vegetables. So that's what the Gemara says. Masiv Marzutra, another question, quarter of the way down, Peches Amid Beis. The Gemara says, Masiv Marzutra, Breder of Nachman, Gorno Lamaiser L'chayv Alav, Mishum Tevel, Mishatig Mar Malachta. When we talk about the granary that causes for Meiser to be chayiv for untithed food, when is that? Mishatig Mar Malachtan. When is that? Ve'ezug Mar Malachtan, Malachtan Hachnosason. That is when it is brought in. Brought into where? Remember, we're trying to figure out who's right, Rav Yanai or Rav Yochanan. Rav Yanai says in the house, Rav Yochanan says out in the field. My lav hachnasasan afila b'sada. Doesn't this apply even b'sada? It says Gemar lo hachnasasan labais zehu Gemar malachtan. Could be even in the house. Me'echatesi that it should only be the sada. I can make the same diuk about the field as I can about the house. No reason to assume one over the other. V'bai sema ki ka'ama Rav Yanai. Maybe the only time Rav Yanai says that it's in the house, that's perhaps only bezeisim ve'anavim delad b'nei goran. Wow, that's a beautiful chakira. That perhaps by all other things that have to go to the goren, grains, corn, whatever, those things go to the goren. Those things that's gemar malachta. But zeisim ve'anavim, they don't go to a granary. They're just brought into the house. You want to eat them, you bring them into the house. So perhaps Rav Yanai would be mechalek. That's what the Gemara recommends. Delad b'nei goran. Abal chitinu seorin that goren behedjek sidbe. There we would say that gemar malachta is a little bit different. So let's summarize. Says the Gemara, Ashkechan Adam b'mechubar. We found out when a man is allowed to eat mechubar, and we also know, says the Gemara, Vishor b'talush, that a cow is allowed to eat food that's been separated. Adam b'talush minel, and here we make one of those 4 grid charts. So look at all the iterations. We have Adam and we have Shor, and we have mechubar and we have talush. We'd make that. So here's a new box we haven't discussed. Adam b'talush minal. And how do we know that a person who is a worker is allowed to eat the food that has been separated? We learn this from a shor. A shor which is not allowed to eat food that's been attached can eat separated food. We see it's a kal, and then there's a chamer pasha that he should be allowed to do that. Says the Gemara, you can't say that. We can't learn from shor. Why not? Says the Gemara, when it comes to a shor, you have a chiyuv to muzzle that animal, or to not muzzle the animal. So says the Gemara, That's not really true, because perhaps we should say, maybe we should talk about putting a muzzle on someone. So we tried to say that there's a uniqueness about shiur. Perhaps there isn't a uniqueness about shiur. So our kasha stands that maybe there is no real comparison from shiur. Therefore, Amar Kra kinafshecha kinafsho shel poel, that the poel and the bailam are similar. Ma nafsho shel im chasamto pater, if the bailam don't eat, they muzzle themselves, that they're pater for meiser. Af poel im chasamto pater. Okay, then we're back to our question about Adam B'Talosh Minal. We need another Ma'amakom. We still don't know where Adam B'Talosh is able to eat the food from. How do we know? Amar kama beis pa'amim. Imenu inyan la Adam b'mechubar. We already know Adam b'mechubar is mutter from before, so we have an extra word of kama. What do we do with that second word? Tzenehu inyan la Adam B'Talosh. We have an extra one, so that's his answer. And then Rav Ami says, Rav Ami Amar Adam B'Talosh lo tzarich kra. For a person to eat food that's already been cut, that we don't need a heter for. Ksiv kisavo bekerem reacha milo askinan shesachar lekatef. Who says the guy was even hired to harvest food? Perhaps he's just the brawn. He's just carrying the buckets, different jobs. And who says there's any restrictions on food whatsoever? He's allowed to eat. He's allowed to eat. So we're going to stop right here at shiur b'mechubar minale. Tomorrow we'll pick up from the sugya there about how we know for sure is allowed to eat mechubar. Wishing you all a mazel tov and a beautiful night.